lots of good stuff. So with that, let's dive in and get started. Keeping in mind that we have a document center tool built into the Pack Store with tons of documentation, videos, etc. So everything you're learning today is out there, and I'll point that to you before we dive in and get started. So if you do want to follow along, feel free to log in. Right now, I'm already logged into my marketplace. The assumption is you know how to get to your marketplace if you've already got access to the Pack Store. Once you're in your marketplace, we're really going to focus today on terminal, group, and template management. So if you're following along, dive in. And here we go. So we talked originally about the core three-step process. The core three-step process is adding your merchant and activating it, adding your terminal and activating it, adding your push app task and activating that. We're going to build on that today because most likely you're not going to be doing, one thing at a time. You might have, a bunch of terminals you're pulling in, or you might have a bunch of updates you're pushing out. So really we want to build on our core knowledge, but we're going to do a quick review of the core knowledge. And before we do that, let's remind you again of your Document Center tool. The Document Center tool is built in, upper right-hand corner, two-sheeted tool. Once you access that tool, it takes you to your current calendar for training, so you can always find out when the classes are. Again, it varies from week to week, so just keep that in mind. Also, just a reminder that we've got these great quick hit videos, some great documentation, developer documentation, and lots of other cool stuff down below, like RKI and some apps that we offer. All right, so with that, back to the marketplace, and let's do a quick review. Before we actually get into the review of adding the merchant, adding the terminal, pushing out the app, I am going to introduce the idea of the sub-reseller level. Now, I'm not a big fan of the word sub-reseller because some people don't relate to that. So let's just suffice it to say that a sub-reseller is like a bucket or a sub-grouping. Sub-reseller groupings are designed for a whole bunch of different things. Number one, it helps you to build your groups. Number two, it helps you to provide your updates. Number three, you build your templates off of those levels. Number four, you also can do permission access off those levels. And finally, number five, those levels are designed for you to do better filtered reporting. So you have all those reasons to create sub-reseller levels. Now, planning your hierarchical structure is really a key. So we saw in the original class that you could just add a merchant direct off the top level, like Jill's Jump Zone. Maybe it's just a mom or pop shop, a one location merchant where you have a couple devices. Now, on the flip side, you might have a big old conglomerate. And I use Jill's Java as my example of the conglomerate. And I already have a built sub-reseller hierarchical structure in place. So I have built out Jill's Java US. Underneath that, I've got different regions of the country. Underneath that, I have different states. Now, just to show you how to add a sub-level, it's really straightforward, everyone. You just go to your sub-reseller add at the level. You want to navigate to where you want it to go, obviously. And then from there, you have to give it a connection. This connection is going to be the admin of that sub-level. So if I put my email in there, I will be the admin of that level. So let's say I've got Jill's Java in Michigan. Okay, we're opening up in Michigan. That's in the US. Notice there's lots of required fields. And finally, states. So we'll go ahead and put in the state. And remember, Pack Store has an activation checkbox. Activation is a key step in going to the next step. Without activation, you're kind of dead in the water with inactive options. And once you activate, it allows you to go forward. It allows you to turn on that green light and go forward. So we're going to activate that sub-reseller. And when we do, what happens is I can see under my Midwest, I now have added Michigan. Okay, now I'm just leaving Michigan in place. Again, there's no right or wrong answer for how you add these sub-reseller levels. You can add them later on and you can move your terminals around if you need to, if they're not in a hierarchical structure that you want to optimize. So stay tuned because we're going to talk about moving and importing, exporting, and all that good stuff. The good news is also down the road, we'll be able to move the levels. But right now, we can't move whole levels or whole merchants. We can only move the terminals themselves. So we'll talk about that coming up. All right, let's say I'm building on my Wisconsin. Now, what I'm going to do is demonstrate two things. You can import both terminals and your merchant locations. I'm going to go to organizations under Jill's Java and see that I have Cedarburg. Let's say I had 50 locations in Wisconsin. Instead of putting them in one at a time, this is where your batch options start coming into play. You could import your merchants and it will give you a spreadsheet to fill out all the stuff and it will create the merchants for you. I'm not going to demo that today because I'm going to import terminals instead. But really, it's just a good old-fashioned big old spreadsheet, right? So we're going to talk about that. Just as an example, Verizon, one of our big clients, they imported all their locations in. Okay, so thousands of locations, you're not going to put them in one at a time. But also, when you get to the terminal level, you can import your terminals as well. Before we show how to import the terminals, I am going to do just a quick review of the add merchant. Add merchant has one required field. I'm going to call this Jill's Java New Berlin. And nothing else. I'm going to activate that. So this is your quick review from the basic class. Once you get a location in there, if I want to add a basic terminal, a single terminal, I'm going to call this my J Java test 1. And remember, when you put in the serial number, as soon as you put in the serial number, and it's going to recognize the model, automatically puts it in. This TID is a placeholder for the pack store, and you're going to want to activate the terminal to be able to push stuff out to it. So again, I'm doing a quick review, and then the final step is to go and push out your app or apps. Now, normally you would do this on a group level if you have lots of terminals, but initially we might want to build that initial file and set up the parameters, which is something we did in the original class. And again, I'm not going to review all of that for time's sake, but if you want to go back through that, we certainly can. And the thing about that is we're going to actually touch on it when we hit the template updating. So we're not going to go into that in great detail right this minute. But when you do work with the parameters and updating your app output, there's also a feature called variables. And we're going to talk about variables in more detail today because variables are a way to get data out in a template format to lots of terminals at once, especially if there's something variable like device ID. So you create what are called parameter variables. And again, I'll show this to you when we get to the template updating feature. Now, once I get all this stuff out here, I went through those 3 steps. I actually added the terminal or added the merchant, added the terminal, and pushed out the app or apps. We're going to build on that now to talk about import, export, and to talk about updating templates and pushing them out via a group. So I know I went through that pretty fast, but just a reminder, you can go back through those 3 steps in the training videos. Step 1, create your merchant. Step 2, add your terminal. Step 3, push out your app and create your parameter templates. All right, so with that, let's build. Let's build on this and let's go to New Berlin. Let's say I've got 10 terminals in New Berlin. I'm not going to put them in one at a time. So the goal here is to incorporate the idea of the import-export functionality. When we do that, everyone on this call is going to have different templates for their different batch operations, dependent on what their marketplace looks like. So notice all these batch operations. Remember, it's a big old database. So we can bring stuff in, push stuff out. If you've worked with databases before, this should be no news to you. I mean, and I'm just going to say, I started training when I was 5. No, I trained since the DOS days. And, a good old-fashioned Excel, you can't beat it, right? So if I go to import my terminals right now, and I've got 10 of them, I'm going to want to do it in a quick fashion with a download of my template, which is my template, not yours. You will have your own template. It's going to pop open my Excel, and it's going to recognize my hierarchical structure. So let me show this to you and how this actually works. It's pretty cool. So when we come up here, there's going to be drop downs for all this good stuff. So we're going to see packs. We're going to see the model that I'm bringing on, the model list. This is where it's going to differentiate. My reseller list is going to be different than your reseller list. So I've got Jill's Java, Wisconsin, and specifically New Berlin. Location is not a required field. Remark is not a required field. Status is. Let's talk about status, everyone. Status is active or inactive. You can only activate a terminal that has a serial number. So if you don't have a serial number, remember there was that auto-generated TID in the pack store that holds a place for it. So let's say we have active, and then as far as groups go, we're going to talk about creating dynamic groups later that will automatically find your terminals. So we're not going to worry about the group function. What we are going to worry about is over here. I'm going to call this JJava 2. And my TID is going to be generated by the pack store. Remember, this is not a terminal ID like in your parameters. This is a placeholder for the pack store. And then we're going to go ahead and put in a couple of serial numbers. Now, the good news is if you're a good old-fashioned Excel person, you know how autofill works. It might backfire on you in a couple of places, like here. We don't want to have a count here. We want to have all A60s. I'm going to say I only have a couple of these serial numbers, and so then the rest of this is going to be inactive. So basically what I've done here really quickly is I've created a spreadsheet to pull all my stuff in. Now, the good news is I could put multiple different models, multiple different locations in one spreadsheet. These two columns are going to direct those terminals where they need to go. So it's really hands off. All I have to do at this juncture is do a quick save. So I'm going to do a quick save as. And once I save this, just going to throw it up on my desktop for quick access. It gives it a name. And then I'm going to close this thing up and pull it in. Okay, so I'm going to close this thing up. I'm going to go add the terminal. And again, just go grab it from here. And don't blink, because unless there's an error with any of my input or a duplication of a serial number, boom, this is going to happen really quickly. Boom, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Now, the cool thing is, okay, good, I've got all my terminals in New Berlin, but I want to now introduce the other things that come into play. Once you get a bunch of stuff in a hierarchical structure of either a sub-reseller level or a merchant location level, it instantly builds in all the filtering functionality. So inactive means there are no serial numbers. We can add those later. Active means they have serial numbers. If they are active and have serial numbers, we can select them all and we can add them to a group. Now, let's introduce the idea of groups. Groups, we said, have, they have the same reasons basically as your sub-levels do, because sub-levels help you to define the groups, but the groups are really designed for you to be able to push out updates, push out templates, push out point of sale systems, push out RKI, push out messages, uninstall apps that aren't working. So there's all these cool things you can do with a group, but your groups can be, again, defined for different reasons. So before we actually introduce how to set up the groups, I might have a group of A60s at the top level because they all need a firmware update. So it doesn't matter where they exist on my tree, they might all just need a firmware update. I might have terminals just at New Berlin that have a certain point of sale system because the franchise owner has different promotions at that location. I might have updates here in Wisconsin because the template for Wisconsin overall is going to be the same, with some exceptions of parameter variables along the way. So what happens is your group structure can be based on all different goals, all different needs, all different ways to update those terminals and keep them current so you don't have to be manually involved in the updating. So when I say all that, and I go back to Jill's Java New Berlin, and I've got 3 active terminals that I want to put into a group to push out my updates, I could add them to the group physically from here. And if I have groups already set up, I can just put them into the group without thinking about it. But what if I don't have the group set up? What if I didn't think this far ahead? What if I want the system to find my terminals for me, and I don't want to manually have to go find them and update them when I've got terminals coming and going left and right, different locations, different whatever, different updates? This is where we're going to now introduce the group concept, which is one of my favorite concepts in the pack store. And people have accused me of being too passionate about groups, but I'm telling you right now, if you don't implement them and you have a need for them, you're really missing the boat of how the system works. So two types of groups. A general group is one that is manual. In other words, if I go into this A60 firmware update, it doesn't automatically find my terminals. I have to manually go find them myself. So a general group is a manual group. That's all there is to it. It is a manual group. You have to go find the terminals and add them and delete them yourself. On the flip side, a dynamic group, yay, is just what it says, dynamic. So as terminals are coming and going from the location that the group is based on, you don't have to intervene. The system will find the terminals. If you have active pushes, it's going to push them out. Oh my goodness, why would you not do this, right? So again, I'm introducing them both. Regardless if it's general or dynamic, there's a way to add them through the plus sign. You have the two options, add general or dynamic. So I'm going to call this A60 new Berlin Jill's Java point of sale only. Okay, so maybe I just create the group for just my point of sale system and not my template. It's totally up to you. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong here. But your groups are going to be defined by two things. Number one, the model, because models go hand in hand with templates, right, and apps. So it's driven by models. So I couldn't do A920s and A60s here. I can only do an A60, right? Then it wants to know the second defining part is where are those terminals located so the dynamic group can find them automatically, in which case you're going to go drill down to where they are located. And this, again, is driving the whole sub-level hierarchical structure. What are your needs? Where do you need to do the updates? That's where you have to build those hierarchical levels, right? So I know that I'm going to be impacting Jill's Java in Wisconsin, but more specifically, all the merchants or just one or two, right? So if it's a specific merchant or merchants, I can then pick them. So again, lots of granular ways to go drill down and get what you need. And now that I have Jill's Java New Berlin A60s and I choose OK, as soon as I activate the group, because remember, without activation, nothing in the Pack Store works, right? So before I even say OK here, I want everyone to jump on the chat and or in your head. Who can tell me when I create this group, how many terminals are going to be in it? Because it's dynamic, it's going to go looking. How many terminals will it find? Now, this is always fun because I want to hear how we're understanding so far, and this is a good checkpoint. So hit the chat window. I'm gonna select OK. Who can tell me how many terminals are there going to be in that particular group right now? As soon as I create it, it's going to go look for them. Anyone? I love this because it's kind of fun. Maybe I'm insulting your intelligence, but let's just go with it. Anyone? Hit the chat. Question mark, Rich Whitehouse, no problem. No problem at all. No idea, zero? You think there's zero. It's a dynamic group. Did I not just import a few terminals? Anyone else want to take a guess? So far, I've got a zero. 2 terminals, Deborah. Okay, way to jump in. You think there's 2 terminals in that dynamic group? What is the group actually looking for? When it creates a group, not only is it looking for the terminals that are located there, but what else about that terminal is critical for it to be part of a group, for it to get updates? Does anybody thinking about that? What does it need to be found by the Pack Store? I'm gonna let this one settle for a minute. Activated, hold in, ding, ding, ding. So it needs to be activated. So how many of those were actually active? And what is the premise of an activation? What do you need for activation? We're on the right path here. And this is, serial number, ding, ding, ding. Deborah, you got it. So yeah, serial number. So when I choose OK right here, guess what's going to happen? Boom, it's going out to look for that dynamic group. Here's my group detail. And when I go to my terminal list, bam, there's my 3 terminals. They had to have serial numbers. They had to, be active. So without activation and without serial numbers, a terminal is not found. But here's the good news. If you're moving terminals into this location from another location possibly, and they are active and they have serial numbers, this is another reason why this is so critical. So those other 7 or 8 terminals that I didn't have serial numbers for, once I add those serial numbers, guess what? Bam, they're going to be found by the group. And if the group has active pushes in place, they're going to hit those terminals without your intervention. This is really good stuff. So what can we push? Now, I've got a bunch of options here to push. I can push an app, which means a template or an app. I can push firmware. Keep in mind, firmware is very, it's not a regular deal. Your terminal comes with firmware. Firmware updates are pretty rare. RKI, we talked about this in the basic class, your remote key injection. If you have a production marketplace under broad pause or reseller, you get 5 of them. If you have a premium marketplace that you pay extra for, you have unlimited RKI push. Messaging is a one-way messaging system to the Android OS. You cannot do a message to a S80 or S300. And then remember, we said the uninstall is a way to pull that off. So if I pushed out a developer app like a point of sale and it's not working, I can pull it off all those terminals, right? So how do I actually make these pushes happen? It's no different than we did at a single terminal level, except if I already have like a template out there. And again, I'm going to go ahead and walk back through parameters really quickly. If I have a template already out there, Jill's Java, New Berlin, I can go to my original template. And again, an assumption that you've been to the basic class, but if I go back to that original template, it's no different if I had gone in and added the app myself. But here's what happens when we get to the parameter window. We talked about parameters. I want to reintroduce and talk through this a little bit. If you have templates out there that are going to impact all the machines, right? There's all different parameters like, our contactless payment, it's enabled. Do I want to change something on here to a 1 beep? Do I want to go to my miscellaneous and I want to change my timeout back to 300? Do I want to go to the EDC button? And do I want to operator protect my voids or whatever there's all kinds of things you can do. But here's where we're going to go back and reintroduce the idea of templates and parameter variables in more detail. Very, very important. When you are working with especially merchant parameters, but it could be any other parameters that you need to have variable data in, if you have a template that's being pushed to 10, 50, 100 devices, it doesn't matter. If there's any data that is going to be unique, if there's any data that's going to be unique, you need to actually do what's called a parameter variable. Now, in the intro class, we covered this very, very briefly, but in order to establish a variable that's going to look for data that's unique to each terminal, you need to do a £, a squiggly bracket, the letters, or whatever placeholder you want for that device ID, and then a squiggly bracket. What does that do then? When you go to push that out to those terminals, as they're dynamically coming and going, and it doesn't know what the device ID is, you provide the variable information either by importing it into the group or at an individual terminal level. Now, not everyone may or may not use the parameter variable feature, but if you're using templates right from the get-go, if you have variable data, you're going to want to set these up accordingly right out of the box. So that's why we talk about it. If you need additional training on how to work with parameter variables in greater detail or specific to your company, you can schedule a one-off training for something like that. But for today, I'm going to leave this as is. If I made changes to my template, I can save it as is, or I can do a save as. So maybe I want to keep the original one in place and call this JJava New Berlin 2. Okay, and I have 2 versions now of my template. Regardless, this group is going to look for and push to this particular group of terminals because I have a push template option going on out here. So I'm going to go ahead and push this. Again, just like in a single terminal, you can push immediately. You can schedule the push, like for later in the day, overnight, whatever. Keep in mind, an immediate push will only happen if the batch is closed. If there's an open batch, the push will not happen. Only if you force an update will the batch get overwritten. So we highly recommend never forcing unless there's a reason for it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and activate this push. Keep in mind, this is a group push. So what happens is, as terminals are coming and going, and this particular template is out there for those terminals at that location, it's going to literally just push those updates out as those terminals come and go. So going back to group management, back to my push. Oh, I've got to go back to my group. Back to my group. There's my push hanging out there looking for my terminals to do the push. Now, on the flip side, if you need to push any type of app, like a point of sale app, a time and attendance app, whatever, inventory app, if there's other apps besides your parameter template app, you can search for that here. And we have a free app out there called Simple Register, which is really cool. Simple Register is a way of you creating a point of sale for your merchant without having to be a developer. So it's a free app that PAX provides that you can use. We're just going to pretend that we've got this one all set up. And we're going to activate that push. So now I have 2 app pushes. And again, that's going to go ahead and look for those terminals. Back to my group, back to my dynamic group, back to my pushes. So I now have 2 active pushes out there. I can put as many pushes out there as I want. Pushing firmware, again, pretty rare that you're going to need to do that. But if you do, that option is available at the group level. Pushing RKI, again, you're limited to 5 unless you have a premium marketplace, but you can go in and push out your RKI. Messaging, let's talk about messaging. What's really cool about the Android OS terminal, you can push a one-way message. So if I need to let everyone at that location know, update coming based on training. Okay, so I'm just letting them know, note new software. Okay, so when I do this, what's going to happen is those terminals are going to get a message popping up on their screen. And I'm going to show you what it looks like right here so you can see what it looks like. Basically, on the right side of my screen, if there's a pushed group message, all the terminals in that group will get that message popping up. It actually takes up the screen. So if you need to get back to business, you actually have to acknowledge and say, okay, you can never respond to these. These are one-way messaging, and it's only going to work with an Android OS terminal. So again, that's an example of a group push. And finally, let's talk about the one last option here in the group management. And again, I'm going to pop back here for my pushes. The other option is, I keep forgetting to go back to my dynamic. The other option is to uninstall, which actually allows you to pull an app off if for whatever reason you pushed it out and it's not functioning. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of steps, potentially a lot of thought that needs to go into this potentially, and a lot of assumption that you understand or have done some of this stuff. But the good news is, even if you don't remember all the steps today, all of this is fully documented. So you can go back and say, oh, I need to go create that dynamic group now, and find the documentation or the video, create the group, and create your pushes. Now, other things that happen here that I want to point out, your group detail is just an overview. The parameter variables, remember I said those could be imported. So if I had those 3 terminals that all had different device IDs, remember we had that whole device, that DI thing? You can add the variable here for it to be recognized, DI, right? And then the variable value. Now, obviously for a group, you're not going to have a single value for the group. It's possible you would, but most likely you're going to want to import those variables, right? So you have 3 terminals, you'd have 3 variables, and when the template pushes out, it's going to look for those variables. How that looks on a individual terminal level, again, you can put variables on an individual terminal level or import them at a group level. But what I want to do is show you how that works, because again, those variables are really important. So I'm going to drill back down to Jill's Java New Berlin. Okay, I've got all my individual terminals. I'm going to go to just the active ones. And from here, if I went into an individual terminal like Jill's Java Test 1, if there are variables out there, I can add them at an individual level. Now, again, most likely you're never going to add these at an individual level if you have a group, but here's my value. Let's say my value is 134. It already knows the app for the template. So what it will do is it will connect that value with that terminal serial number, and that's how it knows to populate that in the template. So again, if you have templates and you have variable data on terminal to terminal, and this is just one example of the device ID. There could be a number of different examples. Once you get that in there, and I push that out to that group, it's going to go looking for that variable either based on the terminal itself, or you could import it at the group level. So I like to bring that to your attention. And you could have multiple variables, like maybe in addition to device ID, you might have, I don't know, there could be a bunch of other ones. Everybody might be different, but I just use device ID because that's a good example of what might be run into when you have this scenario. What's also nice about the import at the group level, if you have multiple variables for multiple terminals, you can do them all at once in one place. So it really is a time-saving mechanism to do the variables at the group level. All right, so we did a lot here, and I know it feels a bit overwhelming, but let me just talk you through quickly those templates. When you create the template, you do it when you're creating the parameters, when you're pushing out the initial app. And again, those parameter apps are based on processor like TSYS or Bluefin or Vantif or whatever. You can always go back to manage your templates by going to the push template area. And whatever templates you have out here, and look at, I've got this wide variety. I've got an Omaha Android template. I've got an Elevon Retail S80 template. I've got an Elevon Android template. I've got a Sierra TSYS, another Android. This looks like this is a Portico. It doesn't matter. It could be different processors, different models of terminals. You can have a whole bunch of different templates out there. But when you start working with these and you want to manage them, to update them, or to delete old ones, or to compare the existing ones, you come out here, and I could do a couple of things. I'm now looking at this, and I've got, Jill's Juice and Jill's Java, all with Omaha. And there's so many out here. I need to clean this up, right? So I've got this Jill's Juice with the cashback, and I've got Jill's Juice Take One Test. I'm not sure what's on these two templates, but if I want to look at the two of them and compare them, it will show me the differential of my parameter choices on each one. So, this parameter value with the squiggly bracket with the DI, I forgot the pound sign. That's not going to work. So I want to make sure I always have my pound sign with my squiggly brackets. Tip. This has no tip. This prompts for a tip. Cashback. This prompts. This one doesn't. It looks like my Jill's Juice Take One Test is the one I want to keep. So I'm going to come out of here, and I'm going to actually keep that one and maybe get rid of that one. Okay. So again,